Good evening, and welcome to the spring webinar series, Resources for Cannabis Businesses. My name is Natalie Darvis, and I am the chair of the business department of Oaksterdam University, the first and longest running cannabis college in the world. I'm excited to be your moderator this evening for tonight's topic on cannabis security. We are here tonight because the Department of Cannabis Regulation has officially launched the Business Licensing and Compliance Assistance, or BLC program, to assist social equity applicants in the city of LA with obtaining a commercial cannabis license and operating a successful cannabis business. This series is part of broader BLC program efforts, which also include live webinars with different subjects and experts, checklists, worksheets, and other management tools you can download and use, and self-directed online education on important topics related to running a successful cannabis business through the BLC's new learning management system, which is usually referred to as the LMS. Please visit cannabis.lacity.org for more announcements on our ever-expanding BLC program. As part of the city's social equity program, DCR has launched the BLC LMS portal, where you now have access to these recorded webinars, in addition to online courses and digital resources made especially for you. Information on how to access this LMS will be in the chat this evening. And please note that there is a much longer educational series on tonight's topic that will be live in this LMS very soon. So please check out the series, Ripped and Robbed, How to Survive a Security Incident in the BLC LMS soon. So before we get started with tonight's topic, we have a few housekeeping rules. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and can be viewed after the editing process via multiple channels. You will be muted with cameras off for the duration of the webinar. This means that your camera and audio functions will not be available to you during this session. However, you will be able to see and hear all of the panelists. There is an open chat box where you can interact with one another for networking or comment on the information. Please ask questions about this subject matter in the Q&A box. We are gathering them and we'll be responding to as many of your questions as possible throughout tonight's webinar. So keep those questions flowing this evening because we're going to have multiple Q&A breaks in tonight's presentation. You are encouraged to utilize the Q&A box at the bottom pane of your Zoom screen. Chat is available for interaction with other participants. If you use the Q&A box for questions, everyone will be able to see the questions when they are answered. And just a friendly reminder, please use caution when sharing personal information in a public forum and keep your questions focused on tonight's topic as it will move fast this evening. So without further ado, it is my esteemed pleasure to introduce you to tonight's subject matter expert, Chris Eggers. Chris Eggers was a police officer for over 12 years in Oakland and San Francisco. He received extensive training from Police Officer Standing and Training, otherwise known as POST, regarding cannabis consumption, regulation, and compliance. Chris spent an extended amount of time working undercover for the Oakland Police Department, focusing on identifying and investigating violent offenders. This experience has allowed him to understand security deficiencies that are exploited by potential thieves, burglars, and robbers. Eggers has vast experience supervising civilians, documenting performance, and instructing on security best practices. And as a private security consultant, Chris has worked with various cannabis license types and has conducted dozens of security assessments of commercial properties and businesses. Additionally, Chris is a member of the International Cannabis Bar Association, Rotary International, and ACES, and has been invited to speak to multiple cannabis organizations about safety, security, and compliance. He currently holds a valid private investigator license issued by the Bureau of Security and Investigative Services. Good evening, Chris. How are you?
Hi, thank you for having me.
We're really excited for tonight's topic. So why don't you go ahead and start your screen share and we can start diving right into this content, and I'll be rejoining you here to bring in the questions from the audience.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So today we're going to cover Ripped and Robbed, How to Survive a Security Incident. And in this series, we are going to talk about how to handle a serious security incident like a burglary or robbery. We'll talk about the risks and liabilities that are associated with these events and what to do before, during, and after an incident. We'll also examine the role of common security measures like video surveillance, security guards, and explore whether or not investing more money will result in a better outcome. We're also going to talk about ways that insurance can shield you from financial impact of an incident if you are following all the requirements of your policy, which we will get into. So in this series, we're going to talk about how to handle serious security incident like a burglary or robbery. Oops, I'm sorry. We're going to talk about surviving an incident, meeting the minimum requirements, burglaries and robberies, and how to protect your people, product, and your business. So meeting the minimum requirements for security and having a security plan, installing the proper equipment will keep you in compliance with regulators. But you're almost certainly going to need to think about security in a more holistic way if you really want to keep your people and your business assets safe from the risks associated with a serious security incident. So unfortunately, as we know, burglaries and robberies are still commonplace in the cannabis industry. Today, we are going to be calling these security incidences. People can be seriously hurt or killed during these incidences, and businesses might be held liable if they didn't take all the required steps to protect their staff, merchandise, property, and assets. So in this webinar, we are going to focus how to reduce the potential for human injury and protect your business from serious security incidences. Equipment, guards, and SOPs, also known as standard operating procedures, that clearly define the roles of your guards are what will help keep your folks safe and how to and better help you survive this incident. But you will need more than that if you want your business to survive the incident as well. So first, let's just talk about what kind of incidences that we're seeing right now. On the screen, you should be seeing a couple of headlines that were taken from the LA area. We see opportunistic thieves have targeted cannabis businesses when law enforcement resources are stretched thin, and some agencies, as a status quo, have very thin resources to begin with. So offenders can likely and are historically exploiting these times during civil unrest, times of gathering, or any time that law enforcement resources are stretched either thin or put in other areas for whatever reason. Caravans of multiple burglaries and dozens of offenders have targeted commercial facilities. So we're seeing, caravan burglaries, caravan robberies, takeover robberies, packs of cars and people, oftentimes armed, targeting these businesses. Retail is the most visible target and one that is covered a lot in the media, but other facilities are not immune. Everyone is at risk, no matter what type of license type you have. Indoor cultivation, distribution, warehouse facilities that house and rent to multiple licensed cannabis operators are all targets, not just retail. It's really important to remember that. So now let's talk about some of the risks associated with these security incidences. So there's human injury or death, which we've covered briefly, but that's always the number one concern. Human safety is absolutely paramount. As a business owner, you want to think about surviving the incident, making sure that your people are protected, and that's number one. But then you need to start thinking about your business and its survival and getting back to business after an incident. You need to start thinking about the loss of cash and product, likely potential for denied insurance claims, license violations, if applicable, and then any kind of civil litigation. Now, civil litigation in the cannabis industry is unfortunately continuing to rise. Civil litigators, and we're going to talk about this in future slides, are attacking cannabis businesses typically on premise liability and negligent security claims, which we're going to cover shortly. So it's not just burglaries and robberies that can hurt your business. There's the aftermath as well. So let's take a closer look at the potential for civil liability after a security incident. We've talked about premise liability, and that's when someone gets hurt at your business because the site failed to maintain proper safe conditions. Now, this can be difficult to prove, but even if you're in litigation, it can be very expensive, even if you weren't found to do any wrongdoing and you need to fight that case. Negligent security is also very common. Negligent security is a specific type of premise liability under which a business owner can be held responsible for injuries that result from activity if it's found that that owner or one of its employees or a hired vendor was negligent in their act. So where we see this typically is with respect to security guards. If a security guard violates some of their own internal SOPs or isn't licensed or is found to be negligent in some sort of action that they took on your property while they were engaged, with your business, that's an issue potentially for you, the business owner, and that's a negligent security claim. Again, this is becoming more and more prevalent in the cannabis industry. And as we get closer to whether it be legalization, decriminalization, reclassification, however it ends up shaking out on the federal level, I think we're going to continue to start to see more and more of these, unfortunately.
Awesome, Chris.
Oh, sorry.
No, go for it. Go for it. Go for it. Keep on
Okay,
going.
sorry about that. Fat fingers over here. Some of the common myths around security incidences, and we want to cover these because this is happening today. This is very, very common, and we hear this a lot from various licensed cannabis operators. And that's that the cops will come to defend your legal business. And that is not a knock on local law enforcement, but a trend that we are seeing, again, is offenders exploiting the thin resources of law enforcement, even using scanners to understand where they are physically within the city, and exploiting that as they use caravans to go around and either burglarize or during business hours, rob some of these businesses. Another myth is that more guards offer better protection. We're definitely going to dive into this in a few slides from now, but guards bring their own inherent liability with them, especially if they're not trained, educated properly, or have the proper certifications and insurances. We're going to cover that, but you should know that security guards are covered through the Bureau of Security and Investigation Services, and they're required to have very specific insurance, training, and certifications in order to maintain their status as a security guard and engage with you at your business. Now, COVID, like a lot of industries, has had a big effect on the security guard industry. Security guard companies will tell you that they are having more and more of a difficult time finding and retaining quality people to fill these positions. So the quality, can go down, which unfortunately brings added liability and risk to you, the business owner. Another myth is that insurance will always cover your loss. So again, not a knock on insurance, and insurance is oftentimes required in many facets of opening up a cannabis business. But there's a big misconception that if you just have insurance and you're paying your policy every month or your premium every month, that you're going to be covered should you sustain a loss. That is not the case. I'm going to go into a horror story later on when we talk about insurance. And then another myth is that you won't get hit, nothing bad will happen if you're doing everything right. Now, absolutely nobody can tell you that you will not be a target. If they are, I believe that they're overselling you. Nobody can predict the future. So it's just important to know, and this isn't to scare anybody, certainly not to scare anybody out of the industry, but it's just important to know that these risks are out there.
So awesome. I just want to take a pause here and ask you a couple of questions, Chris. And for all of our awesome attendees, please feel free to also drop some more questions in the Q&A box now. And if you don't have any right now, we're going to be able to get to more, then we're going to have a few more Q&A breaks. So my first question, Chris, is, you work with a lot of operators who contact you after an incident. What are their main concerns after they've had an incident like a burglary or a robbery?
Sure. So I think it's really important to deconstruct how that incident happened. Now, every facility, as we've discussed in previous webinars, is completely different and super unique. And so if we get a call after an incident, obviously, folks are shaken up, they're scared, they've likely sustained a loss. Hopefully nobody got injured, but it's really important to understand how this incident happened and where are the weak points, where are the cracks within your security plan. And it may not be the physical equipment, it may not be cameras, it may not be lack of guards, but it may be not following standard operating procedures within your security plan. So the result of how this happened is going to vary facility, incident to incident. But their main concern is obviously, not getting hit again. It is very typical that if you are a target of a burglary once, that you'll be a target again. And that's for several reasons. One is that they know how to get in now, and they share that information with other folks who are doing the similar, acts. And then also, once they know how to get in, they likely know that you may not have done anything different other than arm your alarm this time, for example, which is unfortunately extremely common to see. So now they need even less time to get in, get out, and get their hands on whatever it is that they're after, whether it be your assets or cash. So that's number one. I'd say that's probably the most common one is the fear of being hit a second time before they can make the proper implementations to prevent that act from happening.
That makes sense. And so how do these operators usually want to respond to the aftermath of the incident?
So it's really common for folks to want to just get more guards. That's the really fast answer that is really common. But the status quo needs to change for these incidences to start to decrease. We know now that, and we're going to get into this more, and this is again not, guards bring their own value, but they are a piece of the security solution. They are not the entire solution. And I think one thing that we're seeing right now in the industry is the status quo of, I'm going to rely on my guards to solve all of my security issues. And, that just might not be a realistic expectation to set. We've touched on this and we'll get into it more in future slides, but, guards have their own limitations. Every single solution that you implement has its own limitation, and it's important to understand what that is. And an entire security solution is made up of various vendors, technologies, equipment, and standard operating procedures. So it's not just one thing or one widget that you can throw at the problem to solve it, but that is one way that operators typically respond. And that's really expensive, again, brings its own liability and may not bring the intended results.
Absolutely, that makes sense. All right, we got a couple of questions from the audience. Latoya wants to know, so do all dispensaries have to have security or come with a security system?
Sure. So yes, not only the DCC, but the DCR has a very specific, and I can put this in the chat later, or we can send out an email blast to point people in the right direction of where to find these regulations. But there are very specific security regulations that your facility, let's stick to retail to answer the question, that they shall have. One of those requirements is a security guard during business hours. So that's a requirement at the state level. There's also various requirements about having an alarm system, having camera coverage, access control, limited access areas are all very much regulated within the legal cannabis industry. So there's a couple ways to think about it. There's some people want to think about it as, I'm going to do the bare minimum to meet the requirements and then get operational and get going. And I understand that there's a lot of barriers to entry in this industry, and cost is a big factor. So, that's a mindset that is fairly common, but can lead to issues down the road. And I believe is much more expensive down the road as well.
No, that absolutely makes sense. And also to reference the Los Angeles DCR regulations, the expanded series and the learning management system on the same topic will cover most of those rules as well. All right, our next question comes from Xavier. What are some good deterrent strategies to avoid some of these situations? I'm going to guess Xavier means robberies and burglaries. What are some good deterrent strategies? And
Okay.
you're probably going to cover some of this, but you can maybe dive into a little bit of it right now.
Sure. Yep. And that's a great question. But before I answer it, I think it's important because that word deterrent, to deter something obviously means to prevent it from happening, where to detect it means it's happening, now you're aware. So be careful when you deal with various vendors, especially alarm companies that say that their systems or their technologies will deter crime, when in fact, it'll just send an alert to your phone. And that's a notification, not a deterrent. So, again, every facility is different. But a couple things that we found to work very well is looking at your facility and understanding, what the weak points are. And typically, lighting is a big one. Offenders are looking for the path of least resistance, is typically what we're seeing in these burglary and robbery crews in these, caravans that are rolling around and hitting these licensed cannabis operators. Video monitoring is a big help as well. But again, that's a piece of the solution and not the entire solution. So, the short version is, I would say lighting is big, following and having standard operating procedures, and then just educating your staff that these risks are out there. I think that once people have this conversation and understand that the risks are out there, people tend to be a little bit more vigilant in their actions. And we're going to talk about other different technologies that could be put in place. But again, no one thing is going to solve or deter crime from happening.
That makes total sense. It's just a piece of the puzzle. All right, last question here. What is the number one piece of advice you give operators who have just been the victim of an incident?
So I'd say the number one piece is to understand how it happened. A lot of folks, again, equipment can be expensive, and I understand that. But a lot of people I find that have repeated issues want to skip the step of finding out the question to the answer. The question being, how did this happen? Why did this happen? Why am I a target? And that's the discovery phase, where either a consultant or a security expert can come in and help you understand what that is. Now, sometimes people want to just put in the solution or what they think a solution is. They want to put in extra guards or more cameras, and that might not be, part of a solution that solves your problem. So I'd say the number one piece of advice is to really understand what the needs of your business are specifically. And if you don't skip that step, you're setting yourself up for success. If you do skip that step, you're hoping that whatever solution you implement works, and is cost effective for your business.
That's a great piece of advice. All right, audience, please feel free to keep on adding more questions in the Q&A box. And for right now, we're going to go ahead and learn some more about this really vital topic.
So now let's talk about how to prepare yourself for an incident and what you need to do while an incident is occurring to boost your chances of a better outcome. So obviously preparation for an incident is a best defense, and that could be as simple as education, training, and just having a conversation with your staff. But it can also go to, organizing with other licensed cannabis operators. There's a lot of power when you organize as a group. You can information share. And when you start to interface with local law enforcement, for example, typically, you can see better results when you're organized and start to attend community meetings and really interface with local regulators or law enforcement. And that's something we found to be very helpful. We know human safety is always paramount during an incident. No amount of money or products are worth injury or death. And to the point of some of the slides in the webinar, if you have a proper security solution that is meets all of the requirements of your insurance policy, you don't want to sustain a loss. Nobody does. Totally understand that. But you don't want to put yourself in a position where you need to risk human life or safety to protect those assets either. You want to be in a position where if you do sustain a loss, your people were safe, unharmed, or even, not involved at all. And your insurance claim will make you whole. So certain steps must be taken though after an incident. And this is, putting on your business owner hat, right? Again, human safety, our people, our staff, our customers, our patients, our clients that we serve, their safety is number one. You want to survive the incident, but as a business owner, you can lose your business after an incident, and there's, several ways, unfortunately, that can happen. So putting your business owner hat on, you need to understand that there are several steps that you need to take immediately after to help protect your business. We're going to go into what some of those are in a second. So there's a number of things that we want to do before an incident occurs to try to prepare yourself. Some things that can help you prevent an incident from happening in the first place, and some things that will set you up to act appropriately if and when something happens. So we want to establish proper SOPs for opening and closing and our security guards. Not to be too general with everybody who's attending this webinar, but every facility is different. Some folks in here are looking at retail. Some folks are looking at micro licenses, some indoor cultivation, perhaps. So it's important to understand that the SOPs are going to vary facility to facility. But in general, some of the big ones that are that sort of transcend across all license types are open and closing procedures. And if you have guards, understanding what those SOPs are. You should have policies in place to help ensure that your security system is operating correctly. Implementing a plan to perform routine maintenance on the cameras, video storage equipment, and other infrastructure. What you don't want to have happen, which is, really common, we see it all the time, is people have an incident and they realize their alarm wasn't working, or their alarm wasn't armed, or they had several cameras down. So, there's various potential license violations that can occur when those things happen, but also, there's implications with insurance as well. So we want to make sure that we routinely check our equipment. You're paying really good money, hard-earned money to get this equipment installed in your facility. You want it to last as long as possible. And maintenance is a very cost-effective, free way to ensure, that you get the most out of your equipment and the most out of the warranty of that equipment, which is, depending on the manufacturer, it could be 2 to 5 years. So, upkeeping that equipment is really important to maintaining it long-term and providing, real good long-term cost savings as well. And then finally, you should have specific plans in place for security incidents. Create an emergency action plan, practice it with your staff. And again, this could happen at, after opening or before closing, during the weekly meetings, what have you. Just having that conversation, we find that when we talk to operators and their staff once, and we come back a second time, people are much more, vigilant and diligent about security and understanding what those threats might look like. So responding in the moment. So now what do you do when when an incident actually occurs? Notice we said when, not if. And again, this is not to scare anybody, but we do want to be clear that these threats are out there. They are continuing to happen all over the country. No jurisdiction is immune to this that has licensed cannabis operators. And, I believe that we're going to continue to see an uptick in these types of incidences, unfortunately. And if there are robbers at your facility, it's critical to stay calm. And again, can't stress this enough, human safety is paramount. You want to cooperate with the perpetrators in any way possible in order to get them out of your facility as quickly as possible. It's typically not a good idea to try to fight off offenders, overpower them, or physically interfere with a robber in any way. You don't want to try to negotiate or bargain with them either. If there's some way to safely alert other staff members or your guard, for example, if they are not alerted, or if you have one or don't, but if there's a way to safely alert others without putting yourself into harm's way, maybe by means of a panic button, which are very, prevalent in the retail licenses, we see those a lot, and well-placed panic buttons, could provide you an opportunity to make that alert without putting yourself at further risk. You should go ahead and do that as well. In active robbery, in any kind of active security incident, is extremely stressful. So it can be really difficult to focus on the details of what is happening, but try to remember as much as you can, because it could help with the investigation moving forward. And again, just having this conversation with your staff, we find can be extremely effective into getting people in the right mindset to understand that, these risks are out there, and, to be mindful of them. Physical survival is the #1 priority during a criminal incident. Once you are certain that your staff and customers are safe, though, as a business owner, you need to shift your focus to the post-incident actions that will preserve your business. You need to contact law enforcement and report the incident so that they can begin their investigation. You want to make sure that you assess any kind of damage or loss and document that without disturbing the crime scene. Movies and TV, I can tell you as a former police officer, has really kind of made it tough on us, because people think that there's, fingerprints and DNA that can be lifted off of almost any surface. And that's just, typically, unfortunately, it's just not the case. But having said that, you do want to preserve the crime scene, because investigation will begin and you don't know what is helpful, what is not. So try not to touch things such as doors and countertops, POS systems, things of that nature. You're definitely going to want to start to get the video together, have extra thumb drives or CDs around to help disseminate that information to law enforcement. You then want to contact your insurance company immediately. They will begin their own investigation, because certainly you will file an insurance claim, and ideally you've been paying your premium every month and you expect to get, a full return on that claim to cover various damage and losses. But if you don't meet the very specific requirements of your insurance policy, unfortunately, you could see less than pennies on the dollar. And then you want to support law enforcement in their investigation, begin to provide law enforcement with any additional statements, evidence, video footage. And then, as you interface with these folks, whether it be insurance or law enforcement, you want to make sure that you document always, no matter what government agency you're dealing with. You want to document who you're talking to, names, badge numbers, police report numbers, even call signs are all very, very helpful, because undoubtedly you're going to have to call a records division for a police report at some point, and you're going to want to make sure that you have that information handy as possible, so you spend as least amount of time on it as you need to. Again, as a business owner, you need to shift your focus back to getting up and running, getting your business back operational. Make sure you document everything. So now we're going to talk about the limitations of guards. And again, not to pick on the industry, because guards provide a very valuable function, and in some cases are a requirement, as we know. A really good guard can be invaluable to your business. They can provide a ton of value. Very helpful, consistent, and totally worth their weight in gold. But it is important to understand that guards, like any other piece of the overall security solution pie, has its limitations. And some of the limitations associated with guards is training and experience. So as you start to chase on various proposals, you're going to see different hourly wages and different bill rates, and that could be, and oftentimes is, directly associated with that security guard's level of training and experience. And then we want to make sure we set realistic expectations, because we don't want them to manage multiple tasks that take them away from their core competency, which is, depending on what that is, but for an unarmed guard would be to observe and report. If you have an armed guard, we're going to get into this in a little bit, their standard operating procedures or marching orders might look different, but you want to make sure that you understand what those are, you agree with them, and they're followed to a T. So, question we get all the time, and I really do enjoy answering this question, are more guards the answer? So industry-wide, like we talked about, there's a huge reliance on bringing on more guards when there's a security issue, and that's typically where people look to first. But it's not cost effective. So that's one thing to consider, is as a business owner, your budget has to play a part in these decisions. We understand that. So it's important to understand that adding more guards might not be a cost effective. It is really common for some facilities to spend, well over $10,000 a month. I had one client that was spending $40,000 a month on security guards. We're able to work with them and bring that cost down significantly, but that was, prior to meeting somebody who understood security and that was consulting. That was their reaction, was just, more guards. And it ended up getting, north of $40,000 a month at one point. And that doesn't even provide 24/7 coverage. So adding guards after an incident is unlikely to address the root cause of that incident, whether it be a burglary or robbery. So again, it's important to not skip the discovery phase. It's important to really understand, how an incident happened. And even if it didn't happen at your facility, but if it happened at a neighboring facility, we can learn a lot from dissecting these incidences, even ones that we read about in the media. And in many cases, security guards do not deter offenders. And we talked about, the difference between deterring and detecting. So, we have, unfortunately, a lot of data that says that guards at times don't deter crime at all. And so now we're putting an additional person or people at risk when their intended goal was to make sure that, this didn't happen. But we know now that offenders are rolling around in caravans. There's multiple, oftentimes dozens, and it's really common to see firearms in these incidences as well. Labor shortages, like we talked about, have taken a toll in the security guard industry. And guard companies are actively fighting for and trying to hire and retain quality folks. But, even guard companies will tell you that COVID really hit that industry really hard. It's really difficult to find quality guards consistently, and all these companies are vying for the same folks. So, other alternatives can be video monitoring that may transfer risk away from the guards or the ownership itself, and could be more cost effective. But again, that's one piece of the pie. We're not suggesting to eliminate guards and just implement video monitoring, but rather understand what your overall security solution would require and need. And that's just a little bit about guards. Now, you are not required to have armed guards at your dispensary or your retail location. And there's a lot of license types where guards are not required at all, based on, the DCC or the DCR requirements. So it's important to understand what those are and as it pertains to your license, but you are not required to have armed guards. That answer is really up to you, but a lot of things to consider there, namely insurance as well. There's really specific insurance requirements. So you want to understand, if you're going to be paying this policy every month, you want to be in compliance with that policy. And, many people want to know if armed guards are better than unarmed guards. And it's really tough to answer that, because, each business has a different unique risk profile. In some cases, I would say, yes, an armed guard is better if it's the right armed guard. With the right training, experience, standard operating procedures, and management. But, as a blanket statement, that's difficult to say. Each business, again, has its own unique needs, risk profile, and budget. And in particular, you need to consider how that choice affects your insurance policy, as well as any other landlord-tenant agreements that you may have in place. So if you're renting your facility, you want to really read through your lease agreement and understand if having an armed guard or an unarmed guard affects your lease in any kind of way. And then you want to consider, for an armed guard, what if that the presence of that armed guard does not deter somebody or a group of people. And then what happens? And unfortunately, we've seen that can lead to shootouts. And if it's on your property, that could lead to a whole host of expensive issues down the line that could really affect your business negatively. So it's really important to understand the limitations of these guards. And, most importantly, when considering armed guards, people will often say, well, I have an armed guard because it deters crime. And if that's the case, then, that's great. But we know that that's not always the case. And you should ask yourself, well, what if it doesn't deter? Then what do I do? And how am I covered with my insurance there as well? So only you can make that decision, but it's important to understand the worst case scenarios when choosing between armed guards and unarmed guards. And then the headlines that you see to the right illustrate some of the various serious consequences of having armed guards at your site. And again, the decision is yours and yours alone to make. But on the screen is a couple of headlines of, real incidences that have unfortunately played out. So guard liabilities. As a business owner, you need to understand the level of liability that exists when relying on security guards. You own your guard's liability, and that means that if they do something wrong, you could potentially be held responsible, both financially and legally. This is part of the reason why it's important to make the right decision, ask the right questions, and understand what your specific needs are before implementing any solution like that. You should also verify the credentials of every single guard that your vendor sends to your site. So, an example of working on a facility that had multiple guards, daily. This is the facility that was spending over $40,000 a month on guards. One of the first things we did was get a hold of all the credentials and ensure that everybody had, the right licenses and requirements based on not only the client's insurance policy, their own insurance policy, the Bureau of Security Investigation Services, which you'll see mostly noted as the BSIS, and that's the governing body for security guards. And there's a website you can go to, the BSIS website, where you can actually look and make sure that each guard at your facility has the proper certification, training, and any kind of requirements needed. So it's really important to check that out as well.
Well, wow, Chris, that's some really important and really sobering information for sure. And so I just want to pause again here for a minute and ask a couple of questions. So you told us that business owners owns their guard's liability. Does this ever extend to criminal liability? So in other words, can you actually be charged for a crime over something a guard did?
So best answered by an attorney, but I will tell you that it is possible to be to face some sort of legal action based on the action of another person, depending on what those circumstances may be. And those may be, extenuating circumstances that are extremely uncommon, but the risk still is there. What is more common and actually very common is civil liability and being on the hook, if you will, for a guard's actions as the business owner. And, it's no surprise, but with civil litigation, when people sue other people, typically the perceived deepest pockets or folks with the most money, are looped in and targeted as well. And so, when we look at a guard who might be making, let's say on a low end of proposals that we've seen this year of let's say $23 an hour, and then there's a business owner with one or multiple dispensaries, it would be pretty common to see that business owner looped into that lawsuit as well, which could be extremely expensive, even if you're ultimately found to have done nothing wrong. Battling any kind of lawsuit is extremely expensive and can be really detrimental to a business.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So can you talk a little bit more about some of the alternatives to just hiring more guards? Or you said that's like the knee-jerk reaction, especially for folks who have unfortunately been victim of an incident. So what are some, alternatives to just hiring more guards? You mentioned that there are some more cost-effective options to 24/7 guard presence. So just give us a few details on that, and then we can get straight back into it because we still got some more info to cover this evening.
Sure. Yep. So, there's not to spoiler alert, if you will, we're going to get into this in a few slides, but vendor management and vendor contracts is huge. You do not have to sign or agree to, the one contract that that vendor presents to you. You are allowed to go back and forth and negotiate with them as well. So you want to make sure that the contracts allocate the risk properly. Typically in the cannabis industry, with various security vendors, guard companies, cameras, alarms, etc., what we're seeing is contracts that have no allocation of risk and all of the liability on the owner and none on the vendor who is supposed to be providing these services. So that's one area where you can really mitigate some risk and expand your security solution. We're going to get into video monitoring in a little bit, but again, even there, that has its limitations, and there's a few vendors, well, more than a few, but there's different certifications that are required to be able to do it. And you want to make sure that any vendor you engage with holds the proper certifications and isn't just a really, really good salesperson.
That's great info. All right, we got about 15 minutes left, so let's dive back in.
Great. So now we're going to talk about business protections. Insurance claims are part of this process after a security incident. There's going to be certain requirements that you must meet in order to be in compliance with your insurance policy, and it's important to understand those prior to an incident. So the first place to really get ahead of this excuse me, is during the build out phase, or right after you get your license and you're designing your space. You obviously are going to start to explore various insurances based on your needs, but you really want to understand the requirements of that policy and make sure that any money at all that you spend on your security solution, whether it be cameras, guards, alarms, anything, meets those requirements, so that the policy that you're paying every month is ideally going to be good money spent, and you'll see the fruits of that in a fully paid out insurance claim should an incident happen. You want to have, again, well-defined vendor contracts that hold vendors accountable and make sure that those vendors meet those insurance requirements. I know I'm sort of repeating myself about insurance a little bit, but I can tell you we see it increasingly in this industry, businesses going out of business or not being able to afford to reopen because they were under the misconception that I had insurance or my vendor said, when ultimately they're the ones on the hook. So it's really important. And then some of these things, aren't even related to safety and security. One quick example is an indoor cultivator we were working with who was having CO2 issues. They have these big CO2 tanks that they couldn't get refilled, and some of the equipment was pinging the fire alarm, and that was resulting in fines from this particular city. And it took them months prior to an engagement with us to get a hold of anybody at that company that was responsive, that would fix this problem. But that there was really no recourse prior to an engagement. There was no recourse because they were under a contract that had no allocation of risk. The vendor basically could not perform, and the operator had no recourse. So it's really important to understand that that's something you can look into as well, and you should look into as you begin to open up your space. And so, what will insurance cover? What do they cover? You have a break-in, you have a robbery, and you get a claim, and what is going to be paid out, and what will that money go to? So there's many different types of insurances that you're going to be required to have or choose to obtain. You can always buy more insurance as well, but it's important to know the difference between the different types and what they cover. So for example, most businesses not in the cannabis industry have general liability insurance that protect them from claims of injury or property damage, or an issue with their products. Where property insurance, on the other hand, can cover your own property losses in the event of an incident. Things like damage to the premises and equipment, like broken windows, smashed display cases. There's a lot of loss that, as an operator, you either do understand or will need to understand beyond the actual loss of assets. Damage to windows, doors, inside your store, damage to security equipment are all costs that can go under an insurance claim depending on your policy. So to help you understand the various types of different policies that are available and which ones are right for your business, you will definitely want to work with and talk to an experienced insurance agent or a cannabis consultant who understands and can navigate this area with you. Just going to a run-of-the-mill insurance agent that doesn't have any experience in cannabis might not be the best solution for you and your business. Cannabis is obviously extremely regulated, and insurance is no different. There's a lot of requirements that are specific to the industry that other industries don't have to deal with. So you might not be covered if you have exclusions defined in your insurance policy. And these are specific instances under which insurance will not cover your loss, and it'll be explained in your policy. So you really want to understand what those exclusions are. But you might not be covered if you or your guard are found to have done something negligent, or criminal in some way. An insurance claim can also be denied if your premises was not sufficiently secured. And the insurance company understands the DCC and the DCR requirements almost better than anybody. And so they're going to look for ways, and that's part of their due diligence and investigation, is to look at ways where you are not compliant with your policy. And that could be as simple as not being compliant with a state rule or regulation as well. And if that's the case, then your claim might not be paid out at all. And then there's any number of specific requirements that your facility is going to be required to have with respect to security on any given instance. So one horror story for you real quickly is a business that got burglarized. They had over $200,000 in loss, and the very next day began an engagement with our firm. And the first thing we did was look at the insurance policy, and unfortunately for them, had to notify that the door that they had implemented in their front door that was broken into didn't meet the very specific insurance policy requirement of a multi-point locking system. And so their claim of over $200,000 ended up getting paid out at less than $12,000 because of one specific line item and requirement that they didn't meet. So, that's a real threat to a business, sustaining that amount of loss and expecting to get, a claim paid out in full, and realizing that is not even going to come close is, could be really detrimental to many businesses. And then just to expand on that a little bit, I want to talk about these door requirements. And this is just doors. We can rabbit hole on this for, cameras, alarms, and a lot of other different types of equipment. But many people don't know this, but, again, insurance policies require certain types of doors, hinges, and locks around and on your facility. At the same time, there are other requirements that doors have to meet that aren't related to insurance. So for example, they need to meet the ADA compliance, the Americans with Disability Act. They need to meet various fire codes and building codes. And then they have to support the cycle use, which is, a term you might hear when you start to deal with various door vendors. And that means how often that door gets used. So again, taking the time to understand the specific needs of your business and not skipping that step can lead you to making proper decisions that are going to lead to cost-effective measures long-term. Now, if you don't do that, like this horror story I just shared, they implemented a solution and that was the answer. They came to find out that they had, again, $200,000 in loss that went unrealized. So spending the time to do the discovery and due diligence can absolutely save you a ton of money, a ton of time, and absolutely a ton of headache and stress down the road. And so just as an example, doors can cost from anywhere from $2,000 to, we assisted in the implementation of a door solution that had to meet very specific requirements of various different kinds. And that door cost close to $20,000 for one solution. So I highly recommend you consult with a professional who understands door hardware, insurance requirements, and how all of these specifically relate to the cannabis industry, but more importantly, to your specific business. We don't want cookie cutter solutions, all across the board. Your business is special, everyone's is, and it has their own specific risk profile and requirements. Vendor contracts is another one. There's, predatory vendors everywhere. There are in the cannabis industry, and the contracts are a way where you can really start to weed some of these folks out and start to pick the right people to work with. The cannabis industry relies heavily on vendors, specifically on the security side of things. You're definitely going to interface and orbit around a lot of different types of vendors and salespeople, video surveillance, video monitoring, alarm systems, guards, etc. You will need to have clear, well-defined contracts in order to hold vendors accountable. That's really important to protect your business from liability and prevent denied insurance claims. But also, again, security is a line item budget that you pay monthly, and you want the most out of that. And you don't want to be working with folks that have contracts that have no allocation of risk whatsoever. That's going to be way more expensive long-term. And even if you go with, let's say, air quotes, the cheapest today, in my experience, we often find that's one of the more expensive solutions down the road. So you would want to definitely hold vendors accountable and have a mechanism in place. And if there's a security failure and you don't have a contract that holds your vendor responsible, then you, the business owner, are going to be held responsible. And that's the same with cost as well. So negotiating contracts, one of my favorites. You should spend as much time as needed asking questions when you're negotiating your contracts. You should always try and get the answers to the questions in writing, even in an email, so that both parties can refer back and reference this. I cannot stress that enough. Whether it's law enforcement, the DCC, the DCR, insurance, or your vendors, you want to have things in writing so that you can reference them. And it's in part because people move. Some people move on. Some people change departments and may not be there to stand up and say, yeah, I told that person that, or yes, that was my recommendation. So it's important to get that in writing. You should also have a mechanism in place for non-performance, and that agreement should clearly define what happens if your vendor fails to perform the services stated in that scope of work. And then before you hire any guard, specifically guards, but any vendor, you want to make sure that they carry the proper licenses and insurances that are required of them. And again, guards are required to go through and be certified by the BSIS. That's the governing body, similar to the DMV for cars. The BSIS is for guards. And so you want to get a copy of their certificate of insurance, which will also be referred to, you'll see it as COI. And if a vendor can't produce that, run. Any vendor should be able to produce that within minutes. If they tell you it takes several days, that's a red flag. So certificates of insurance should be readily available with, a vendor who's actually, allowed and should be working in the space.
Well, that was a really compelling presentation, Chris. Thank you so much. You can go ahead and stop your screen share, and we got time for maybe one or two more questions this evening. So my first question is, when you review a contract for video monitoring or for guards, what are some red flags you see that might suggest the vendor is not being entirely upfront, or perhaps they are just inexperienced?
Yeah. So again, looking
Chris,
at
unfortunately, we lost your video. If you could turn that back on.
Yep. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Fingers. So, one of the ways is looking at their contracts. And again, the first question I would ask is, can I see your certificate of insurance, regardless of the vendor type? And if they can't produce that immediately, that would be a big red flag for me. Another one would be to ask for client referrals. Can you tell me who you're working with, and can I give them a call? That's I think one of the most effective ways to sort of sort out bad vendors and bad engagements. Now, understand that a lot of vendors, like if you were to ask me that question, my first answer is that all of our clients operate under non-disclosure agreements, meaning I can't without their permission tell you who they are, where they're located, or what we do for them. But we do have obviously a Rolodex of clients that we've already asked that question to, and a list of folks that know and have offered graciously to allow us to provide their name and contact information should a client referral be requested. But I would always ask for client referrals.
I think that's a great piece of advice. And a lot of consultants are bound by that. And so having a few people that you can speak to will also give great peace of mind, for people looking for new vendors. All right, our next question is from Dale. Is there a good place to find out the options and reputations of security service companies or vendors?
Some people look online, right? Depending on the type of provider, the BSIS is a good place to start. Obviously, if you have a low voltage person, they're going to have to be certified by the state, and you can go through, various state channels to look at the licenses that this individual holds. But again, insurance is the very quickest, easiest way to look. If they provide a COI that is outdated or dated last year, well, that's a really bad sign. But again, I would go back to client referrals and speak to people who are actively engaged with this individual or this firm, and they're going to tell you, hopefully they're going to tell you the truth, but that this is an opportunity, and we've seen it happen before where we ask for a client referral of a vendor that we may want to engage with, and if a client says, oh yeah, we're actively looking to move on from this firm or this provider, that's like really good info that you might not get online. That's
great. All right, so what's your final piece of advice for our audience this evening and those who are watching this later on around these security incidences in the cannabis industry?
Yeah, the status quo right now is a stovepipe Band-Aid patchwork solution of various vendors that go unmanaged, no accountability, no allocation of risk. And so my biggest piece of advice to get away from that is to don't skip due diligence, don't skip discovery, site visits, security assessments, really getting into the nitty gritty of what your specific business needs, and then using that information, that data, to make proper decisions, and implement those solutions can provide really, really aggressive long-term cost savings to you. So, right now, again, the status quo is to try to find the answer. We see that a lot. Like, what can I do? Just put it in place. Well, it's not as simple as that. If you want to be successful, sustainable, and compliant, and obviously respectful to your budget.
That's a really great piece of advice. Well, thank you so much for your time. This was such a great presentation and really informative, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
So thank you for attending this webinar this evening, and the full course for this topic will be available in the BLC LMS soon for you to get more detailed information on tonight's subject. Many templates are also available for you to use to support your business planning efforts in the LMS. And there's a lot of templates available on this particular series that will be available in the BLC LMS soon. And during the month of April, we will be continuing these educational series on Tuesdays and Thursdays. On Thursday, April 14th, we will have our second installment on raising funds and identifying capital with Jean Sullivan from ArcView Group and Krishnan Verrier from Arcadian Capital from 6 to 7 p.m. Following this series will be our next installment on inventory management with Wally Wong from Meadow Software. That will be on April 26th from 6 to 7 p.m. And concluding April, we will have a deep dive into moving cannabis merchandise, an advanced topic on transportation and delivery with Angie Panuela Ruiz on 4/28, also from 6 to 7 p.m. And I'd like to share some other key info tonight. Before you leave, please fill out a brief survey to share your experience this evening. We are dropping the link for the survey in the chat now. We really appreciate your feedback, and we will use your feedback to fine-tune these webinars moving forward. On April 28th, there will be a virtual job networking opportunity. You can upload your resume as a job seeker, and employers can hold one-on-one video interviews. The link for this event is in the chat, so you can sign up for more information for this April 28th event. And the same link allows you to RSVP for coaching. And here are some more details on this virtual job networking opportunity. This will be held virtually from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on April 28th. Employers can identify and schedule one-on-one interviews of candidates throughout the whole 10 to 2 time period. Licensed cannabis business owners will be able to interview workers who self-identify as local, social equity verified, and transitional to help these employers satisfy your required good faith hiring requirements. And job seekers will be able to connect with full and part-time, event-based, seasonal, and temporary work and explore career pathways in the cannabis industry. So for those early birds in the audience, a virtual exploration and video tutorial for this networking event will be ready to view starting April 21st. And next, social equity employers, do you need to assess, increase, or develop your workforce? Free human resources coaching for equity businesses has begun. Sign up to receive individual or small group mentorship specific to your needs, whether that be how to recruit, hire, train, or develop your team while fulfilling LA's good faith hiring requirements. Register for your free personalized workforce development coaching session by following the link in the chat that we are dropping now. The City of Los Angeles has good faith hiring requirements, shortened to GFHR, for all licensed commercial cannabis businesses. To this effect, the city has created a survey to collect information on GFHR compliance to help gain an understanding of the challenges faced by licensed businesses to fulfill these requirements. We are dropping a link for this in the chat right now. The information gathered by this survey will be used to inform future educational programming. And licensees are asked to fill out the survey once for every licensed location that they have on or before April 22nd. And please visit the DCR website to learn more about good faith hiring requirements. There's an FAQ located there, at cannabis.lacity.org. 2 Fridays from now, on April 22nd, will be our next installment in our series on business assistance sessions. These sessions are for operating or aspiring social equity licensees and are a dedicated time for you to discuss your business goals with the same subject matter experts from this webinar series this spring. These office hours can be easily accessed by clicking the Zoom link provided in the chat. The DCR will be hosting one-on-one coaching sessions for the following categories at the following times. So again, the next one's on April 22nd. From noon to 1 p.m., we'll be on patient and consumer safety with Tiffany Watkins. From 1 to 2 p.m., we'll have retail operations with Maha Hawk. From 2 to 3 p.m., we'll have delivery operations with Robert Fierro. From 3 to 4 p.m., we'll have the business of cannabis distribution with Angie Panuelo Ruiz. And from 4 to 5 p.m., we'll have manufacturing operations with Dr. Stephanie Gangano. So again, the next set of one-on-one coaching sessions will be on April 22nd, and we'll also have another set at the same time with the same experts on April 29th. So on behalf of the Department of Cannabis Regulation, I'd like to thank you for attending, and I hope you have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you real soon.